All right, guys, now we are moving on to our last ecology topic, or 5-5, which is going to kind of take a lot of what we learned in Unit 5 and even at other times in the school year and apply them to how humans are impacting the biosphere and various ecosystems, as well as solutions to those things. So here we have a couple things that are impacting the world in different ways, or maybe could be seen as a solution to some of those impacts. So here we have like what looks to be a power plant pumping out a lot of air pollution, probably to create energy. It could just be a regular factory, but kind of has the look of sort of like a power plant to me. And creating a lot of pollution. And then over here we see these windmills. We don't see any gases coming off of them. And they're actually really enormous. This is a boat down here, just to give you perspective. And sometimes these big facilities are called like wind farms. And these are not going to create any kind of waste, but then some people, think they are going to block the beauty of the view that we have. I'm guessing this is an area that gets a lot of wind coming through here. I think this is actually in Australia. I don't think they would put them all so close together unless there was just like a lot of wind on a normal basis through this area. But I grew up in an area in Northern California where when you were leaving the area to go to Highway 5, you go over these mountains and they had tons of windmills. Even, I guess, probably back to when I was in high school, maybe. And I never thought it interfered with the beauty of the mountains in any way. I actually thought they looked pretty cool. So we could see this over here. This power plant is creating a lot of impacts, probably burning coal and stuff like that over here. Definitely, different impacts of building it and getting the materials, but windmills do not create any pollution and are seen as kind of like a solution to burning fossil fuels. All right, so here we go. So we're going to go over a number of different topics, and we're going to start with pollution because this is such a big one that crosses over into even other topics that I'm going to go over. So this could be seen as the unloading or dumping of toxic chemicals or non-biodegradable objects into the environment, like plastics, for instance, are very non-biodegradable, and I'm sure you guys have been hearing are accumulating in the oceans and in the waters and are getting into fish that we eat and stuff like that. So that would be an example of a non-biodegradable object as opposed to just like a chemical or something like that. Here we've talked before about farms. So here is a farm and you can see all this nasty stuff running off the farm. So that would probably be land pollution coming from all the pesticides and chemicals they're spraying on the land. And here, as we see it dumped into the water, this is now creating water pollution. And then this also gets complicated because where is this water going? Like, it's possible this water is flowing, let's say this direction, and it could flow down to a neighboring farm that doesn't want to use these chemicals, like maybe an organic farm that's not using these chemicals, and now they've got these chemicals to deal with as well. Or maybe it runs into a neighborhood creek or something like that, and now people, just normal people, are being exposed to these pollutants, and it brings up a lot of politics even as far as people's rights to clean water that isn't polluted. So here we have like land and water pollution going on, and then this is to illustrate obviously the Earth is kind of choking on like air pollution. So we're going to talk about the three different types of pollution that these pictures kind of intro here a little bit. So we're going to start with water pollution, and so let's look at the pictures. So oil spills are hugely horrible form of water pollution. A lot of animals get caught. This is a seagull that's been covered in oil because they don't understand the oil is there, and they'll go in the water and then they'll get it on them. And so we see people go out there and try to rescue them. So hopefully maybe they're going to try to clean this seagull off, but just took a picture to show people what's happening. And there's people who go out there and volunteer to like use different soaps and materials to try to clean off the animals and try to save them and help them. And then over here we have a huge oil spill off of this oil derrick. And if you've ever driven up to Santa Barbara, you can actually see the oil derricks that are off the coastline there. And these are super controversial. A few years ago, one of them broke and huge amounts of oil spilled into the Santa Barbara area. And if there was enough ocean flow, it could even come down into this area, into Malibu and into Ventura or things like that. And so um, my degree is in environmental studies from UC Santa Barbara, and they are the first school to ever have any kind of like environmental education program. I think I already told you guys this, and it's because of the oil derricks. People were protesting and really upset about the oil derricks that were being built and the threats of them having horrible oil spills, like we see here. And the people who ran the school realized this was a important thing for people, and they decided to make the first sort of environmental education program in the world, and that's the program that I went through. So if you're interested in those topics, which hopefully you are, because we need to come up with solutions to a lot of these things that we're doing that are damaging ecosystems in the biosphere, that would be a great school to go to. And it's literally right on the ocean. The location is amazing. So definitely consider that if those of you thinking of going into maybe fields dealing with the environment, which include laws, legal, business, what else? Technology, lots of stuff goes into that industry now. So a lot of opportunity there. So oil spills are going to be a really horrible form of water pollution, going to affect a lot of animals, even the really advanced animals like dolphins and seals and whales that are out there. We talked on the last slide about chemicals coming off farms, and running off is the term, runoff. Waste from factories getting dumped into water is pretty typical, as well as trash. You guys may have heard of, there's this thing called the Trash Island in the Pacific Ocean, and based on the movement of the Pacific Ocean, it's caused all the trash to kind of accumulate. And from what I've heard for years now, is that it's the size of Texas, this trash island. And a lot of people don't even know it exists, and it's hard to see from like space or with a camera because it's kind of spread out. It's not like one giant clump, but it is seen as covers the same distance that Texas would. And so trash in the ocean, obviously here in Southern California, is a big problem. Stuff even that gets thrown away, like a plastic bag in Calabasas, could technically kind of find its way to the ocean if it got over the hills and blew its way down over time. And so protecting the oceans here in Southern California is very important. So here's a big oil spill off a tanker. So this one was off a derrick, and this one's off a tanker. And so you can actually see the difference in color, and there's almost nothing we can do. They has to basically settle to the ground. And when I was younger, maybe in high school, there was a huge wreck by an oil tanker from Exxon that was called the Valdez. It's a famous oil spill. I think also they heard that maybe the captain had been like on drinking alcohol or something, like he was impaired in some kind of way, and it wasn't just normal. It was like some kind of alcohol or something, and he crashed it, and it was this horrific, just horrible oil spill. I think it was in the Arctic. It was in like a polar area where it's really clean. They have almost no pollution, so it was just really devastating. And you see they're putting something on it here, but this isn't really going to do anything. It's almost even for show, because this stuff just has to settle. But I guess at least they're trying to do something. It just has to settle to the bottom, basically. Here's a beach covered in trash. I've had students that said they've been to other parts of the world where they've seen stuff like this. Obviously, this is really horrible, and it's important to control our trash and recycle. I see a lot of plastic in here that could be recycled, that maybe an animal in the ocean is going to try to eat. You've probably heard that turtles will try to eat plastic bags thinking they're jellies or jellyfish, and they don't understand, and then they choke on the bags and stuff like that. So again, protecting our water from trash is really important. Here's a bunch of waste probably coming off a factory. You can see it's actually going into a pretty nice little wetland, it looks like, or something, a lake maybe, and just dumping huge amounts of waste into that lake. All right, I'm going to go into air pollution. So this could be like from smog from cars, and as well as something called acid rain that you might not have heard of, which is caused by sulfur emissions from factories. And cars don't cause all the air pollution, but they create a lot of it, but factories do as well. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So here we see a factory creating a lot of air pollution. I mean, the air quality here looks really, really bad. And then here's a big freeway. I'm not really sure where. Maybe in China. It's hard to tell from the lettering on this sign, but I kind of think it's in China, where it's just the air quality is, there's lots of people driving lots of cars, lots of factories. creating a lot of air pollution, which affects people's health and just the quality of our life. Here are like a student group. It looks like traveling. I believe it's in China. China, as we talked about in the last set of notes, has over 1 billion people, and those 1 billion people are using resources, and it creates a lot of air pollution in the process. And I mean, these buildings really don't look very far away, and they're hard to see, especially when we get back here. It's getting even harder to see, like the top of this building, for instance. Usually now I'd say, okay, where is this? So you guys should be able to recognize this is Los Angeles. LA has had a lot of history of bad air pollution, but it's actually gotten better. There's certain things in cars, like a catalytic converter, for instance, which helps not create as much air pollution and really reduced it a lot. My dad grew up in Pacific Palisades in this area. My mom grew up in Orange County. And they say the air pollution was much worse back then. And I remember one time as a kid driving north to home from Disneyland, going over the Sepulveda Pass, which is right here, sort of between Brentwood and Sherman Oaks, and coming over the hill towards the valley that Calabasas is in, and seeing this huge, like almost looked like a physical object, like a giant spaceship almost, of smog, just this dark orangey colored smog just kind of sitting over the city, or over the valley. And I'd never seen anything like that where I grew up in Northern California, and it was pretty shocking. But since I've lived in LA and been teaching in Calabasas for about 14, 15 years, I've never seen anything like that. So I think it was a lot worse when I was younger, which is good. This picture is dealing with acid rain. So what we're seeing here is different forms of pollution being released from industries, transportation, ore smelting, which means kind of like melting metals and stuff, and doing stuff with metal, and then power plants. And they're releasing different types of nitrogen and sulfur. They get turned into acid in the atmosphere, and then they come back down as different types of precipitation. Here it's saying this is just like they straight up are falling out of the sky. But here it's referring to acid rain, acid smog, acid snow, and acid mist. And this is probably not something you've heard of before. This was definitely being talked about a lot in about my junior and senior year of high school. It's more of an issue on the East Coast, where they have more like these kind of factories. And sometimes in class I ask, like, for instance, what is the football team in Pittsburgh? And as I asked that, a lot of kids out there probably know that it's the Pittsburgh Steelers is the football team. And stealing, or working with steel, would fall under this category right here of ore smelting. And so we don't have as much of that on the West Coast, so we don't have this problem as much. But it was definitely pretty shocking when it started to happen. And I remember that as a kid and being really concerned with it. This is a forest that's been damaged by acid rain. And the good news is, as long as the soil isn't destroyed, the plants can come back. But if the pollution is bad enough, the soil also gets destroyed. And then the forest is going to be really messed up for a long time. But the good news is the soil helped protect the seeds and stayed intact. And we do see regrowth happening, and the plants are starting to come back, which is really good. But this really shows what can happen to the trees and stuff. And so imagine really sensitive animals like frogs, for instance, get really damaged by this because they have that moist skin. The eyes of animals, the eyes of people, very moist and sensitive. Those are like the parts that get the most affected. So when we talk about like amphibians, like frogs and salamanders, they're heavily affected by acid rain and things like that. All right, I'm going to stop there just so this video doesn't get too long, and we'll continue.